Hello, Chitheads listeners, and welcome back to the podcast. In today's episode, I interview Joakim Vindenes, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Bergen in Norway. Our conversation today revolved around topics related to virtual reality, or VR for short. This is a really interesting topic that we haven't had an opportunity to explore on the podcast, and many people might understandably have some hesitations about what VR has to do with the things we explore at Embodied Philosophy. But Joakim's research is about the intersection between virtual reality, the therapeutic use of virtual reality, and also philosophical questions about art and identity, and a lot of the philosophical principles that we explore through Eastern philosophical traditions like non-dual states. He also has a bit to say about the relationship between virtual reality and contemplative practice, which of course is what we're all about here at Embodied Philosophy. So I found this conversation to be very interesting and is actually a great introduction to the topic of virtual reality and its relationship to Eastern philosophy, which we're going to be exploring for the next couple of months at Embodied Philosophy, culminating in an event in February, which is an online conference on the intersection of Eastern philosophy and virtual reality. So if you are interested in signing up and getting more updates about when this conference is happening and articles about it, make sure that you join us by going to embodiedphilosophy.com/VR, and you can sign up for the mailing list and we'll send you more information as things unfold. Again, that's embodiedphilosophy.com/VR. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Chitheads. My guest today is Joakim Vindenes. Joakim is a PhD candidate at the University of Bergen in Norway, where he is researching virtual reality technologies. In his spare time, he runs Matrise, a blog focused on the intersections of virtual reality, or VR, consciousness, science, and philosophy. Matrise has lately increased in popularity and discusses VR technology in relation to topics such as psychedelics, Hinduism, existentialism, meditation, and non-dual states, topics that we're going to explore today. So, hello, Joakim. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks.
It's nice to have the opportunity to talk to you and to explore a subject or a topic that we haven't really looked too much into on the Chitheads podcast. So this is definitely new territory. So I'm looking forward to it. But to begin, I would love to just hear a little bit about, how you became interested in virtual reality and what has led you to, this PhD research that you're doing now.
Yeah, I think for me, I just happened to try VR in a shopping mall. And from that instance, it is a very experiential stuff. You have to sort of experience it, which is some of its great aspects. And from then it was, okay, wow, I didn't know what we do with it because it's had like a sort of power. So for me, it was just I was on this mountain looking down and had a fear of heights. So that was really the start for me. And I had just been interested in, okay, this is a nice thing to program because I was a programmer. So it was nice to be
fear of heights, or programming an encounter with a fear of heights.
Well, not necessarily, just being able to actually program experiences instead of like you have a small graphic user interface, like a square on a screen. This was more lively, more felt. Yeah, so it was an interesting topic to see what you could do with it.
So just to press on with that, what you're saying about a fear of heights, was it that the fear of heights led you to want to explore that experience in a way that might get you over your fear of heights, or what was the connection there?
We have actually been doing some work with exposure therapy, this for fear of public speaking to some degree, but it was mostly that an actual technology could deliver such intense experiences. Or I like to say that you can deliver the content in the format of reality. And when you get to work with that, okay, you can maybe do more than you can with designing an app for a smartphone or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that, on sort of on the topic of what you're starting to discuss, which is, I think most people, when they think about virtual reality, or when people are considering virtual reality, it's generally spoken about as a kind of escape from reality, or something that is taking us away or distracting us from the needs of the world. It's sort of like a juvenile pastime in some sense. So obviously this is not, your primary interest in VR, although of course it's being used in that way as well. So what are the ways, you're already beginning to discuss the ways in which there are therapeutic benefits, but can you talk about a little bit of the research that's being done around the therapeutic benefits of VR technologies?
Yeah, sure. I think there's not necessarily anything wrong with the sort of distraction in itself. Of course, everything can become a problem in that regard, but no, that is not my primary interest. I really enjoy some of the research that is using virtual embodiment, where those who participate in VR identify with the virtual body, and they use this as sort of like an explicit mediation to change the person's notion of self in particular. One of the favorite experiments that I enjoy there is one that puts you in the body of like a virtual Dr. Freud, and you actually get to, well, first you are embodied in yourself, and Dr. Freud asks you to tell you a story and about your life or how you're doing, and then you are placed in another body hearing yourself telling that story. So the ability to change perspectives, maybe you can give yourself like a warm hug if you're able to view your problems from outside, not being that judgmental or critical. I think that is maybe a core feature, that it enables you to change experience, to break out of the normal way of thinking that I am this thing inside my body and this is how I relate to the world or to other people. Just if it can enable people to break for just a few seconds from that thing, just to, okay, maybe I can look for these experiences in other things. So like an intervention, there are a lot of these things by embodying people in different ways.
Yeah. I mean, even when you just described that, I can already feel how potentially powerful that would be to essentially articulate, as if you were in a therapeutic setting, and then to have this opportunity then to sort of, after the fact, then flip it around and see a body looking very much like yourself, articulating the same thing, but from the position of an observer. I mean, it seems like it would be quite powerful. So have there been, has this actually been implemented in therapeutic practice so far, or is it something that's more just being experimented with and has yet to be practiced?
Yeah, in this case, I'm not sure of the first authors of this paper, but one of the primary researchers in the VR field who is doing this is called Mel Slater, and he does actually have a company, I think, that is called Virtual Bodyworks, where they are actually attempting to use this. Yeah. So I think so.
So but there hasn't been much information yet about the effects from the perspective of the patient. Do we know anything about that?
That is interesting. I mean, the paper that discusses this is, of course, relying on the patient information that it allowed a new perspective. I do think, however, that a lot of research is based on like these numerical measurements on a scale from 1 to 10. How do you feel after this such and such intervention, which is perhaps not the style that I would like to do in my own research, but it would be interesting to do more like a phenomenological study of how does it feel, how does this change of perspective feel, etc., to understand it better. But still, the research is very good. It is showing the effects of the intervention. So, yeah.
Excellent. So
it does seem to work.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it would. I mean, just by how kind of radically different it is from the normal kind of, therapeutic interaction. So, what are some of the other features of your research, or some of the interests of your research in particular?
For me, I am now I'm doing a PhD on VR. I've been doing so for 2 years, and I have two more years left. What I'm looking into is to, like I said, trying to gain a qualitative understanding of the VR experience itself.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing for me is how it actually mediates our experience, because when you enter a virtual environment, to a certain degree, the application is defining your subject position or who you are in terms of the virtual environment. And this is sort of radically defined by the medium. So I want to gain an understanding of how does it actually mediate experience. In my case, I will do a study where people can create or creatively express themselves by drawing or by using images, etc., in buildings, and just to see what kind of relationship they can develop to the virtual space. Because I think, I mean, we use a lot of energy in defining the spaces that are around us, like they identify us. We have objects that we like that represent symbolic values for us. Right now I'm in my home. I made this a particular way because it symbolizes things for me, and I think this will be a necessary thing to also bring to the virtual. How can we make the virtual meaningful, not just like smack up a few walls and do something, but how can we make interaction with virtual realities meaningful in some way?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about this a little bit, on your blog, where I did a lot of, where I've read a lot of the things that you've written about this, and one of the things that you mention is that you don't want to dominate the user's experience, but rather open it up for new experiences that can be interpreted by the user. So, is that in a sense a little bit like, moving into, you're using your home as an analogy, you move into your home and you're kind of forced to exist in the design and the aesthetic that someone else has chosen for you, so it's sort of analogous to you walking into a home and having the sort of creative opportunity to make it what you want it to be. Is it something similar to that in what you're looking to cultivate in the VR experience? Is this sort of openness to interpretation, openness to the outflow of creativity in some way?
Yeah, maybe. In a sense, I think the aim of not attempting to dominate any user experience would be in the context of trying to provide some sort of therapy or maybe spiritual wellness, in a sense that I think also that it can be a danger to just be immersed in like your own little private world. But I think
Good. I
there
don't know if I
it
want to
would
go there.
be no, right. So maybe the sort of surprise aspect of a virtual environment would be to how can you maybe reveal something about yourself that you didn't know. Um, when I wrote that or thought about that perspective, like doing like that the user experience is not wholly defined by the system requirements of the system. It's more being able to depend on you and maybe show you something that you didn't know. That's been just an inspiration from like using flotation tanks or doing meditation, because often then you get surprised. You get surprised if you pay attention. So if you pay attention to something that can reveal something to you, maybe this can sort of intensify that progress or bring you into an accordance with something, or yeah. So in this case, the medium would not try to show you something that is predefined, but maybe act as an augmentation of your bodily status or your mind status, or get you to focus in, lock in, like a meditation thing into some feed or something, and you can go from there. Yeah.
So I'd like to kind of maybe get a little more detailed in what you're talking about already, which is meditation, because of course, those listening are mostly familiar with this podcast as one that explores contemplative practices. So obviously we're already talking about it, but can you speak a little more directly to the ways in which VR can support contemplative practice, versus, I mean, not to say that, the generally formal ways that it can be done are less than effective, but in what ways does VR kind of support or can potentially augment that meditative sort of state?
Yeah, sure. I think for my part, I have yet to use VR in any meditative practice, although I have had extraordinary experiences with VR that, of course, have been meditational in the sense that it's been a focused experience on certain aspects. So for me, it's more an interesting way of research, potential future possibilities. But the hypothesis that I do have is that for me, meditation helped me sort of zone in with my body to actually listen in a way, just not to be in my head. And I think that could be an aspect, for instance, through using heart monitors or other sort of biometric signals from the body and sort of portray them through your outer reality. So you have virtual environments that sort of breathe with you through your breath and represents your inner state to a certain extent. And I have hope for like a neurofeedback thing, maybe, that can help you sort of synchronize the two aspects of yourself if you feel very divided or alienated. And maybe that can help you sort of look for that in the everyday.
So, okay, so I wanted some clarification around this idea of you were talking about it breathes with you. So is that, just to kind of visually represent it, because I'm having a hard time sort of imagining it, is it that the device is creating a sort of mirroring experience where you are seeing a visual representation of your inner state? Is that essentially what it does?
Yeah, but it could also be more or less abstract. I mean, you could have the trees or the wind following your breath, or the clouds moving in a certain. And it could either be firstly based on your heart rate, and then the virtual environment is representing that, or it could be that the virtual environment is calm and is trying to get you calm through the synchronization. So it could be either or, but attempting to this synchronization of the inner state of you and the outer state of the world, to maybe try to approach. It doesn't mean that it would have to fix anything. It could have a calming effect then and there, but to try to see how maybe then if you're walking through the city, you can feel or try to move something of the same thing, not alienating yourself from it, but trying to approach some sort of unity in a way.
That's so interesting. I mean, I like sort of both of the ways you describe it could be utilized, because you could imagine that in some contexts, it can be incredibly fruitful for an individual to be able to witness, and maybe they didn't even know how anxious or erratic their kind of inner nervous system state was, and they have this opportunity to actually like fully reflect on just how stressed out they are, and then maybe subsequent to that, there's this then opportunity to then use the same sort of experience to then calm them down and to take them towards a state of equilibrium. So that's so fascinating. What was interesting about the breathing environment, which touches on another article on your blog, is that it really reminds anyone listening who happens to have taken any kind of psychedelic substance that it sort of is very analogous to that experience, because anybody who's done magic mushrooms, for example, has witnessed the kind of breathing nature of nature, really, and the way in which you see mountains kind of wave-like in a way that sort of corresponds to your own inner tapestry and everything else. So segueing into that, you've written about how virtual reality and psychedelics are in some sense, I don't know, they can facilitate sort of similar types of experience. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, primarily it's because they are showing you things that are, to a certain degree, virtual. They are changing your experience of the external environment, and you're relating to stuff that is not, well, it is at least subjective in the moment. So I think, in a way, psychedelics can be a model for how therapeutic applications should be. And I know of several VR applications that I'm not sure if they explicitly state that that is their intention, but it's at least very obvious that they're doing this. And I mean, I know one researcher who I met at a conference who made the sort of thing that I talked about previously, where the environment breathes with you. But also, there are similar things. There are really a lot of this stuff to bring into the synchronization. And to me, I mean, that is what psychedelics tend to do, right? There is no longer the total separation, as you can also get in meditation, or maybe even more so, between your inner life and the outer environment. It seems to sort of go together in a different way. You don't get the blurred, hard line between your subjective state and the outer environment. So I think that VR may have something to learn from psychedelics in this regard. And of course, the one does not exclude the other, which is also an interesting aspect, how maybe VR may be able to facilitate psychedelic experiences in a better way. Yeah.
So this is all very interesting, and I guess one of my broader questions that I have for you is, obviously we're witnessing an increased interest in both VR and psychedelics. There seems to be just a seeking out of, states of consciousness that sort of transcend the current and prevailing narratives. And do you have any thoughts, waxing philosophical, as it were, about why this is? Like, is there something specific about the time that we're living in, besides the fact that it's even possible, particularly with VR, that we're so interested in seeking out these kinds of experience?
I'm not sure, but I mean, a common thing to blame or praise would be the internet, right? There is a lot of information available to people. You stumble over things, you noticed, oh, what I've thought for so long was so and so. And yeah, I guess information is readily available. And to be honest, psychedelics and virtual reality is one of the, at least to me, it's very interesting. They are very interesting topics. So when information is available, people who are interested will find what is interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the topics that you explore on your blog relates to Heidegger's conception of, or his critique of technology, which is quite nuanced, but you bring up this idea of an enframing narrative, right? This the way in which we are kind of socialized in various ways to try to lock in or box in our various, perspectives about life and the way that reality functions. And you really point out quite beautifully the way in which VR can assist in maybe disrupting those and framing narratives. So do you have any thoughts on that? Because I guess that's more, the spirit of my question is wondering, are our current enframing narratives in, whatever Western culture leading to just a profound need to break out, in a sense, that is maybe more, is calling people now more than at other times in history?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, personally, I notice, at least on the internet, or in general, the tendency to root for a certain team, right? And the cultural, I mean, I'm young, I don't know, but it seems that the cultural way of actually being able to be righteous in this or that way, and to define yourself as on the righteous theme in so and so way. It at least has a certain power to it that makes people subscribe to it, for better or worse. And at least it makes you notice the power of what Heidegger is talking about like das Man, and how you ought to adhere to a certain cultural narrative, and the way these narratives enframe the world in a certain way. It presents the world in a very easy way, right? So the way I understand Heidegger, and I'm not a philosophy major in any way, is that all of these perspectives that people have can be seen to be correct. I mean, they are not wrong. They are correct relative to the own framework that they are presenting on the subject. However, they may still limit revelations. They may still limit our perspectives and the way we see things. And to me, one of the most beautiful experiences in the world is that of revelation, when something breaks loose, when these things fall down and you can actually see the stream in some way coming through, which is more beautiful. And that may be the definition of truth in this regard, as opposed to correctness. Yeah. So I think that many people may feel that. I'm not sure, of course, VR may help in this. It may also make it worse. For me, when I tried to imagine a technology that could act as a catalysator for revealing of truth relative to a technological enframing, it was more like a challenge, because I was reading there's a philosopher called Don Idy, who was he's an American. I think he's at Stony Brook University. He's getting old now, but he's still publishing. Is very critical of Heidegger's technology. Don, like as in Donald, IHDE.
IHDE. Okay, I'm gonna look him up. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No problem. He was sort of. He is terming a new direction for phenomenology, which he calls post-phenomenology, where he is critical of Heidegger's technology criticism, and sort of, I mean, I'm very heartfelt agreeing with Heidegger. I think it is metaphysically true. It's just not necessarily as practical. So he was writing something like, it's very hard to imagine any modern technology that would fulfill Heidegger's requirements of actually revealing some sort of truth. Yeah. So I try to imagine that just like a thought experiment, how VR could do that. And I think it may be true to an extent, but then again, Heidegger's technology criticism is very rough. Yeah. Not many can escape it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it seems like, and I wonder if this is something you consider as well, I'm sure it is that there's of course like the kind of research that you're doing, which is sort of thinking along the lines of liberation or transcendence or some kind of therapeutic impulse, and then there's sort of the impulse of capitalism, which is going to entertain and in a certain sense like enslave people to the narratives that sell, right? And this is sort of an ongoing, I mean, in every industry, this is of course something that we have to face. So I wonder if there's, even ways in which VR also can kind of assist that political project of, which is sort of what you're saying, political project of kind of disrupting those enframing narratives.
Yeah, that's a good question. At the same point of being a person who believes in the power of, say, VR to do good, I would classify myself as a technological determinist also in that regard, and the same thing.
What does that mean, technological determinist? What does that mean?
That technology sort of runs its own course, and maybe the same thing can be applied to capitalism, that this is something that sort of has to happen or happens, and that we can't do much about it. But at the same time, I would be a part of that. The good thing about that determinism that someone will also explore the positive aspects of it. So maybe it's a perspective of it will get worse before it gets better or something like that. But I think that for many people it will be a personal and existential choice how they deal with technologies, and hopefully for those who are willing to make those choices, there will be available options to use those technologies for other purposes than the prescribed way. That's
Yeah, I mean, I sort of feel that way a little bit about phones. I sort of feel like eventually it's going to get so bad that there will be a sort of backlash against, the kind of exhaustive use of phones, or the way in which phones have kind of completely penetrated every aspect of our lives. At least, I feel like certain cultures, especially in American culture, it seems to be getting much worse. And I know, there's slight variations based on culture, but it seems to be getting quite bad. So yeah, I think you're right, and I really liked what you mentioned before about this distinction between truth and correctness, which really actually I think dovetails nicely with the insights of many Eastern philosophical traditions. You write about Hinduism, particularly in your blog, or on your blog, and of course the Eastern mystics would agree that truth is something that transcends the sort of the categorizations of culture. So I wanted to touch on Hinduism because of course many people in our audience are very interested in it, and you see quite a obvious parallelism between the kind of insights of VR and some of the Hindu theological and philosophical principles. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that and the kind of parallel that you see between them?
Yeah, to the degree I understand it, I'm quite new to the field, but I think that maybe the primary similarity is the fondness for, or the understanding of the world as a drama. So when I think of VR, I think, okay, what is VR? What is the origin of VR? And I think the origin of VR is our tendency to wish to create stories, maybe to create realities, and to create drama in that sense. So VR is like it's an ultimate representation, and of course Hinduism is a big thing, but at least in the terms of illusion, like Maya, and adhering to the illusory, which can be a negative thing, it can be a cause of suffering, but it can also be a marvelous and magical thing. So the dream, the sort of tickle when we create movies, when we see things, when we create culturally and framing narratives as Heidegger, we wish to create stories, and we wish to create worlds which are equally as virtual, the worlds and the narratives we present to ourselves as maybe things that are mediated through the VR. So it's an interesting perspective for both, for Hinduism to look at VR and for VR to look at Hinduism. Of course, the Matrix film series would be like the ultimate primary example of this for most people, but it's interesting to go further back to the original sort of story. So I enjoy these perspectives. I enjoy it as a worldview in that sense, and it's interesting to see the humanity in the technology.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting, I think, is our conversation is oscillating between two different ideas of illusion, like illusion that sort of binds us in a kind of way, and of course in the Vedanta is particularly looks at Maya more as an enslaving illusion, right? And sort of the life goal, or the goal of existence is to transcend and to become one with Brahman and to realize one's true self as Atman. But then there's also other, traditions in Hinduism, like the tantric Shaiva tradition, which sees actually illusion as potentially liberating, or as useful. And I think that's the other side of what we're talking about, is this utility of illusion. And I was thinking, actually, I wanted to talk about this earlier, but I forgot to bring it up. And I'm wondering if you've seen that Netflix series starring Emma Stone, where they go to this, there's this sort of like therapeutic VR experiment. I can't remember what it's called. I should have looked up the title of it beforehand. But essentially, it's like this. These people get selected and they are supposed to get some money, but it's this big radical experiment where the machine is basically a therapist, and the machine essentially has some kind of consciousness. But the individuals who enter into this this experiment, they have virtual encounters with each other, and then they also have virtual experiences by themselves. And the computer that is the therapist also plays roles in this kind of illusion. And the point of it is to work them through certain traumas or certain issues. And the character of Emma Stone, for example, ends up her sister dies, and she has a lot of guilt and grief over it. And by the end of the series, she sort of moves through this grief, and actually transcends it. And to me, that also really aligns with the kind of Hindu narrative of Maya or of Leela, where we are, going through these different narratives of life in order to resolve certain karmas.
Yeah. I haven't seen it, unfortunately, but that sounds like a great tip. I should do. But yeah, I think Leela, is that like play or something?
It's play, yeah.
Maybe, yeah. It sounds great, and I think also it's interesting with science fiction or in general imagination to just inspire these things, and how can we do it and I think also that is something that my next blog entry will be about, is VR as a sort of existential problem, in that to a certain extent, without making it sound too grandiose, it is kind of godlike being able to define reality, at least in its conceptual variant. Right now, it works well, etc. But if we are asked this question, that we can actually define not necessarily reality, but what we feel as the input and output of our system, what should we do? There aren't that many limitations in terms of experiences in the virtual as it is in the real. So VR as an existential problem would ask us to a certain extent who we are because of what do you want to do? If you're given the possibilities, what would you want to do? And that is also what is triggering me to explore these alternative uses of the medium, because there is a lot of possibilities here, and what would we like to actually experience? And science fiction is basically a way to do that. Science fiction has always been, So I need to find out.
Yeah, you have
Did you
to
say
watch
Emma Stone?
Emma Stone. I'll look up the title after this conversation, and I'll send you the link to it, because I think you would find it. I mean, especially given your research, you'd find it super fascinating. It's very connected to all of this. And it's
cool.
also pretty good. It's a pretty good, as far as Netflix
that's
series
good
go. So this is something that comes up, and I've seen this in other philosophical thought experiments before. I think maybe Brain in a Vat is one of them, where the idea is, what is, and you bring a sort of similar train of thought in one of your articles, where the question is something like, if you could satisfy your sexual desires, for example, in the context of a virtual environment, or if you could find, modes of human fulfillment that typically people seek out in the outside world, and have all of that sort of satiated or satisfied by a virtual experience, then what's wrong with that? And is there something wrong with that? Like, at the end of the day, like what allows us to discern whether or not that's better than an unsatisfied life in the real world. And I'm sort of
Yeah.
wondering just personally kind of what you think, what your response is to that question. And if you do think that there is something about, if we could find human fulfillment in a virtual experience, would we be missing something if we weren't actually going through the unsatisfied, unfulfilled experience of a typical human life?
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, it depends on your worldview, right? So, and to get back to Heidegger, it depends on, do you imagine or can you imagine that your life will give you a surprise? Say that you are in a rut, you're stuck, there's not much hope, etc., and you have the possibility of a good virtual life. Not that this is necessarily a reality right now, but for the thought experiment, it's a great way to test our ability to wish for authenticity, or what is authenticity? Is it just the answer to our inner needs, or is it something else? So for my part, I hope I wouldn't succumb to the virtual reality temptations, but that is because what I would value, or what I hope I would value, is the surprise, the ability for a certain narrative to take a huge, gigantic turn, something that Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings, would call like the eucatastrophe, that everything is dark, but there is this possibility for a shining light to sort of turn at the last minute of the narrative. So the surprise, the ability for your whole reality to turn inside out, would be missed if you are betting on the way that you currently understand the world to be continued in a better way in a simulated reality. So it just depends on whether you think you know enough. If you knew enough and you have like this reductive narrative, like I don't know what they call it, but like scientismic or whatever. You think that the world works in a certain way, you're very sure of it, and that you're just a sensory modal loop going into sort of feed, and this is a process of that. Then maybe, or I have actually talked to specific people, they would opt in for the pleasure machine or the experience machine. And yeah, that is more like a symptom decision, I suppose. What would be interesting is to be able to be surprised, to be able to have a revealing of something that you didn't know that can rush over you, and that would of course be left out.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, like that you're making, that it's the desire for that is in a certain sense kind of symptomatic of a worldview or an enframing narrative where what you're describing is sort of missing, which is part of the reason why I think philosophy is so important. It's like interesting that philosophy and science get separated, and then scientists try to wax philosophical without actually a knowledge of the tradition, and so many presuppositions kind of play into their characterization of what reality is all about. Anyway, that's my own personal bias.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah, I enjoy philosophy, and I think it serves a really important role that most people do not really understand.
Yeah, or take the time to explore. Or think that it's about kind of armchair theorizing and has no kind of way of affecting or relating to everyday reality.
Yeah.
So this has been super interesting, and we're moving towards the end of our conversation. And so I wanted to just maybe ask you an open-ended question of other ways that you, just based on what we're saying, in terms of the kind of more beneficial effects of illusion or VR, if you have any other thoughts or things you wanted to wrap up based on what we've been talking about.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that whatever gets people to adopt or try new perspectives, and even if it's in a sort of an interventional way, if it can surprise them into new perspectives, it's what is needed. So I don't think that, say if you're trying to approach some sort of understanding or enlightenment, it wouldn't be depending, of course, on the actual virtual experience. The virtual experience would be a way to open up said view of perspective towards something. So my hope for VR is that it can give people new experiences that can help them not to live in VR, but to use that as a way to actually appreciate reality, which is something that Jaron Lanier, who actually founded the term VR, is talking about in his book. That there is also a feeling that when you get back from virtual reality, wow, it's nice to being able to live in this tactile, really felt human world, and being able to reflect on reality based on your experiences from virtual reality can make and provide an attentive relationship towards how you are feeling, and I think that can be beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting and kind of not paradoxical, that's the wrong word, but to reflect on, you can imagine, of course, like we're saying, that there are these addictive tendencies, right, in human culture to want to in some sense evade the suffering and the pain of existence, and we do that in a variety of ways. We take drugs, we drink, and then of course we can also like put ourselves in this virtual world. And you're describing sort of that the VR might itself also could potentially, used in the right way, actually help to heal that which would trigger someone to live completely in a virtual world. So using VR to transcend your addiction to VR might be an interesting thing to explore.
Yeah, exactly.
So lastly, I guess one thing that I wanted to talk about, which we've been talking a little bit about, but I wanted to talk about it more directly, is there is this sense of that the freeing of different kinds of experiences, it feels a little bit similar to a kind of artistic impulse, right? And the art as something that kind of exceeds the normal boundaries of our aesthetic imagination. And you talk about this a little bit, I think, in your considerations of Heidegger, where Heidegger was interested, particularly at the end of his work, in this what you describe with the term poesis, the Greek term poesis, which I mean, is it? Do you think it's okay to translate that as just kind of the poetic impulse of life, and the way in which VR might be able to help free us toward the kind of healing possibilities of that artful and creative kind of the various forms of expression?
Yeah, I really enjoy that. At least the degree to which I understand it, poesis will be more open, less classified, less judgmental from beforehand. It will be more, okay, what is this? So being able to facilitate the openness is a great thing. The less classified it is, the less directed, the more explorative, the more dependent on experience, redirecting to experience of being. If that can be facilitated, then that is great. And that is the great role of art. I didn't enjoy it before because I think I was a classifier. I like to classify things. But
and then you realize you can classify art as a non-classifier.
Yeah, right. Then I became an art critic. Yeah, I think that is a great potential. Just opening up to experience. Yeah.
Beautiful. All right. Well, Joakim, this has been a fantastic conversation. So the last thing I wanted to ask you about is if you have anything you'd like to point people to. I know you have your website. What is the website's address for those listening?
It is matrise.no. So that's matrise.no. And yeah, that's where it's at.
All right. And,
I don't have anything else.
And I wanted to use this opportunity also to mention that you are going to be speaking at our virtual reality conference, which is happening in February, and this is actually the first of our kind of forms of media that we're releasing about this VR topic. So those of you who are listening who are interested in exploring more of this intersection between virtual reality, Eastern philosophy, contemplative practice, therapy, this is basically the theme of our upcoming quarter. Next few months, we're going to be looking more at that. So be sure to check out our website for more information. So Joakim, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure.
Thank you.